freedom fighters coming at you with a breaking news update. Well, I'm sure you heard about this Tucker interview, and that's what we cover here: breaking news, current events. We discuss political topics, touch on preparedness, survival, tell you how to navigate this crazy world you're living in. I do gear reviews, stuff like that. So if you're new here, at the very least, if you could give me a like and share the content, and if you like the video enough and you feel the need to subscribe, it's greatly appreciated. But yeah, so I'm sure you heard about the interview, and I'm here to give you the highlights and analysis and try to break down this 2-hour interview in 10 to 15 minutes. But yeah, so on the topic, Tucker was doing this interview, and of course all the talking heads were like, it's treason, he's sleeping with the enemy, and all this. Yet many American journalists have interviewed Putin over the years. But it's only treason, or it's only a problem when someone uncontrolled, gets off the leash and does something on his own. They can't have the people hearing the truth from independent journalists. And it reminds me a lot of when Trump went to North Korea, and he crossed that South Korea-North Korea line and shook hands with Kim Jong-un. And they're like, he's, making friends with a dictator and all this. And it's like, look, there's a big difference of trying to be diplomatic and achieve peace than like dapping a guy up and handshaking and patting him on the back and becoming buddy-buddy. You're trying to accomplish something and solve problems. So that's what I believe the interview was about. So let's get into it. But yeah, the first 25-30 minutes of this interview was kind of weird. And Putin goes into this, long-winded rant of like historical contents of Russia. And at least for myself, it was kind of hard to follow. But I forget the original question Tucker asked. But I think it was about the start of the war and all that, and Putin kind of dodged it and went into this history lesson, which essentially went down to, well, it was always a part of Russia anyway. But yeah, then I saw a tweet earlier that was pretty funny that said, Russia's president went on a 30-minute monologue of Russia history, where our president was deemed legally retarded in a court of law and can't be prosecuted, which I'll do a whole nother video on. But yeah, that was great. But then he starts getting into some good stuff. He talks about how he had a meeting with Bill Clinton, former President Bill Clinton, about joining NATO, and then said he was like, yeah, it's a possibility, we'll look into it. We want to strengthen Russia relationships. And then they leave, and he brings it up again, and then it's like, no, we can't do that. And then he talks about a previous visit that he had with President Bush, I believe Bush Sr., he said. And he talked about, NATO relationship and specifically a unilateral missile defense system. And he was like, yeah, it's interesting, and, we're definitely interested in working with this and working with you. And then he says some CIA handler Gates and Secretary of State Rice came into that room, the exact room Tucker and Putin were doing the interview in, and sat on that table and was like, nah, we can't do it. And, Tucker chimes in here and says, well, it looks like, these are two examples of, basically the deep state. He doesn't use those words, but, undercutting presidents. The elected leaders. And that totally shines light on, the shadow government we constantly talk about. These black suits, men in black with the, black glasses, and they come in and dwell in the shadows and make the real decisions. People coming from the Pentagon and, the military industrial complex and stuff like that. If you think the president and these politicians are the real people pulling strings and making moves out here, you have no clue what's going on. But so that's what's really going on. Then they start going in talking about is there a way to achieve peace? And he talks about the Minsk agreement and how they've, already screwed that up, but there was, trying to have peace. And he says, well, have you achieved peace now? Are you done? Are you going any further? And he says, no, they haven't finished their goals and that they have to do denazification. And that's what their whole operation is about. And again, they don't really call it a war. They call it some military operation, special military op to denazify the area. And he goes back into another geohistory lesson of the Bolshevik Soviet Union revolution and stuff like that, and dropping some red pills on the masses there. And I saw Elon Musk tweeted that out as well, so hopefully that wakes up some normies. But they got these Antifa types here in America who are like, we're fighting the Yazis, and don't realize they are the Yazis, and they are celebrating the Yazis. And it reminds me of that old comedy skit, I think it's Monty Python or something, where they're like, are we the baddies? When they come to the conclusion of what's going on. But, and then he also mentions the Canadian Parliament debacle, where they actually invited in a old Yahtzee leader. I forget what he did. Maybe he was a camp guard or something. And the whole Parliament stands up and applauds. And they don't even realize who we're fighting for on the behalf of. And he talks about this further too. He talked to Zelensky and was like, your father fought against these people, and now you're fighting with them. But yeah, then they're like, so where does it end? And where are you going to further the war? And he says he has no interest in furthering it. He's just trying to take care of, the Arctic problem. He asked if he's fine with the land that he has. And like he said, he's like, we're not done, but he has no interest in going into Poland and Latvia, unless they become hostile and attack Russia. And, recently Russia lobbed some missiles over in that direction, and people were saying they wanted Poland to, I think they scrambled the jets and were getting ready to take them out. And that's what they were looking for, but they turned course at the last minute and headed back to Ukraine. So they might be looking for an excuse for Poland and, NATO to get involved. But he said, as long as they stay out of it, they have no intentions of doing anything like that. But he also said, look, America and NATO are funding this war. And if they stopped all this, it'd be over in a week. So the tension is building in that regard, where he's like, you keep sending money and this is what's keeping them in the fight. So even though you're not here, you're a part of it. You're guilty in it. And then he says the next step of escalation is if there's actual troops on the ground. And that's where it kind of gets serious. And he says, we're going to be, he doesn't say nuclear war, but he says that could lead to something really catastrophic. And he says, we're finding a lot of Polish mercs on the ground. And there's, American fighters on the ground too. But, American mercs. I think there was a CNN host that actually joined some kind of group and fought in Ukraine. So, yeah, Americans are there. But that's totally different scenario than actual, military soldiers, the country's armies on the groups, boots on the ground. And he's like, once that happens, it's a real war, and nuclear war is possible. So then he hops into the Nord Stream pipeline, and Tucker and Putin have a nice little exchange there. And he says, Tucker asks, well, who blew up Nord Stream? And he says, well, you did. And Tucker's like, oh, no, I was somewhere else that day. I was doing something. And he was like, well, you may have an alibi, but it was the same old people, doing as they do, those same black suits that we were talking about earlier, deep state, dabbling in stuff, that make decisions beyond presidents and politicians, and, whatchamacallit, So yeah, they were laughing at that. He talks about the fall of the U.S. dollar, and that's basically what leads to wars. And there's a lot of channels on here that talk about cycles, and I believe in that. History repeats itself. And you look at the reason we always go to war, and a country loses its status, they lose that, their economy and everything falls, and they go to war. I mean, you look at World War One. It's like at that point we're stupid poor, and we win that war and escalate our country. The Second World War, they want to make you feel like, oh yeah, it was all on, we were going to save people and do the right thing and be American heroes. Yet we were coming out of a depression, and again, people are dirt poor, there's no hope and everything. What better to rally the troops and get a war going and, becoming the world dominant power to spur up the economy again. So that's where we're headed. But he talks about the failing U.S. dollar and how they pushed them away, and how that they only used to use 1 to 3% of transactions in the yuan, Chinese currency. And now he says they're up to like 35%, and I think another 35% in rubles. So, they're using a lot of other money. And my question is, what is the other percentage? You still got another 40 something percent, 30% in there. Is that in gold or other assets and oil and natural gas, or what else are they trading in? But at the end of the day, he says, the fall of the U.S. dollar is in America's hand, and they're pushing people out. And, they created the BRICS money system, which is the come together of all these countries. I forget what it is. It's like Russia, China, Saudi Arabia. It's Brazil, Russia, India, China, Saudi Arabia, and I think more have joined in. But and they're all basically on the gold standard and created their own currency, and America's failing policies have caused it. And then they kind of go into a lighter topic about AI super soldiers. Well, a lighter topic, I mean, I guess it depends. But, he talks about these, AI armies and stuff. And this is literally Star Wars-esque. This is like Clone Wars, AI robots and stuff like that. He talks about Elon Musk putting chips in people's heads and stuff like that. He goes into talking about this reporter that was captured in Russia, and trying to get him exchanged for someone. And recently they were talking about getting him back, but we had to get, the woke administration had to get their pot-smoking lesbian back home. But Putin says, I didn't really know much about this case, but he says the guy was caught red-handed getting classified information and stuff. So Tucker was like, this guy's clearly not a spy. Who knows? But then they touch back on the war, basically come to the conclusion, he says this is basically a civil war, a conflict between the same people. And he uses this analogy where he was like, they surrounded a group of Russians and told them to surrender in Russian. And these people are speaking exactly. I couldn't surround a group of Chinese and say, bing bong bing, surrender your weapons and we'll take you in. So they know the language. Even if I could, I was bilingual and could speak it, they could tell I'm not Chinese. He's like, these are the same people, and this is why they attack our history and attack the churches mainly, so they can try to separate us, but they'll never separate our souls. And I'm going to end on that, and that's where they end the episode. But on that note, what I always say, we're on our own. Get right with God, because only God can save you. Freedom Fighters out.